Let me try this again. Okay. It's been 2 weeks since I filmed an episode, and it's already feeling unnatural again. So, give me some grace. As always, asking for you guys to give me grace. Probably will ask you that until the end of time or whenever I finish this podcast. But anyway, hi guys, welcome back to the Now Listening To podcast with your host, Allison Martin. For anyone who is a weekly listener, you will know that I took a break off of last week, so had episode 5, then took a week break. Now we're back with episode 6, just because I was really busy and very overwhelmed with how much stuff I had to do, so I took a break because I took a semi-spontaneous trip to New York to see Stephen Dawes, which I've been documenting on the Now Listening To pod Instagram. So if you guys don't follow me there, I posted some New York vlogs. But basically, Stephen's episode will probably be the next one after this, or maybe after that. I want to flush out as much Hispanic Heritage Month content as possible, because I didn't even realize when I posted the genre bending episode that was the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. So anyway, that's kind of the precursor to this video. I do expect it to be more in the 30 to 45 minute range, but I always say that and then it ends up being an hour and 15 minutes. So yeah, I also have literally no notes, so pardon my French, but I'm literally going to be raw dogging this video. So if it seems more tangent-y than my other episodes, which virtually impossible because those are also I don't have a linear train of thought. But today I'm going to be talking about reggaeton music and what it means to be Latin enough. So, with that being said, we'll just get into the video. I've said this in probably 3 or 4 videos at this point. Oh, also something I did not mention, but I will mention it now. If you notice, we had a set update. I won't say change because it really didn't change that much, but I moved. I might try to film a clip of where my setup used to be so you guys understand my frustration. But basically, I redid my vinyl wall, and it's now a much more convenient setup than it was before. Anyway, with that being said, I've said this in about 2 to 3 of these podcast episodes so far, but I am Peruvian American. I'm a quarter Peruvian. My grandmother's from Peru, and 3/4 white. So I'm mixed. I'm 3rd generation. So my grandmother immigrated here, then my dad, obviously, and his siblings, and then me. White mother, mixed father. Yeah. So just as a precursor, all of those things are true. So as we talk about kind of my Latin identity and talking about things during Hispanic Heritage Month, I just wanted to touch on that again as kind of setting up for this episode. But basically, my first exposure to Latin music and kind of just general background on coming to grips with my Latin identity. I have grown up in a very Hispanic heavy part of the US, and then obviously when I was not in the US, I was one of few Hispanic people. So growing up in the US around people who are actually Latin or Hispanic, in air quotes, of course, because what does it mean to really be? It was not really a part of my culture that I identified with. I didn't see myself as Latin or Hispanic anytime someone would ask something about like our family, I would say, oh, my grandma's from Peru. But I never made the association, even as a kid, that also meant that by proxy and by blood, I was also Peruvian. But that's not to say that like my Hispanic and Latin culture wasn't like a really strong part of me growing up. It was just like I never had, which again is gonna be something that I talk about in this video. That's why I'm saying it. Sorry guys, I'm getting my footing again. But a big part of, I think, Latin culture, or a big part as it's been described or laid out for me when I was living in this very like Hispanic heavy part of the United States, is that if you don't speak Spanish, then you're not really Latin. And that language is a huge component, because language, you know, I was gonna say is everything, but I don't think that's true, and I guess I'll talk about that in this video. But yeah, I never learned how to speak Spanish from my grandmother, and my dad also speaks even less Spanish than I do, which is kind of funny considering kind of the order of operations. But yeah, it was not something that my dad and his siblings were taught, and then by product, I never learned to speak Spanish from my family. So all the Spanish that I know was from self-study in school, and then just like actually really trying to connect with my culture and keep it up. So yeah, that's just kind of painting a picture. But Latin culture was still a really big part of my life. I went to Peru for the first time when I was 13, and met all my extended family, like very aware of like where my grandma came from and the history of our family and Peruvian traditions and food and music and dance. Like all of it was really pertinent. So that will maybe just be my taking off point to talk about music, is kind of the dance and music of it all. My dad's side of the family, so my dad's mom is my Peruvian grandmother, and like my lifeblood in terms of being Latin. And something that was like a really vital part of my childhood is I would see my grandparents 2 times in a week, because my parents were really young when I was born. So my grandparents were like really, really crucial. Like my dad's parents were a really, really crucial part of me growing up. So every Friday we would go out to dinner, and then every Sunday we would go over to my grandparents' house for dinner. And every Sunday, like especially I remember when I was a kid at my grandparents' old house, like not the house that they live in now, I would go up into their bedroom with my grandma and like later on my siblings and everything like that. And she had this big boom box in her room, and she would put on music, and we would have dance parties. And that was always the case. And then like even when we'd go to like Mexican restaurants and stuff, and they'd be playing any mixture of Latin music, we'd be dancing outside. So lots of dancing and, I don't know, cultural connection through music and dance. But I wouldn't say that I sought out Latin music or Spanish language music on my own at that point. Let me catch my breath. I just talked a lot. Yeah, so I didn't really seek it out. So I'd say my first exposure to Spanish language and Latin music was through my grandmother. I don't really have any specific artists that come to mind that I can give sources to say like, oh yeah, this is what I listened to with my grandmother. But yeah, she was my earliest kind of influence. And seeing like the tricklage through her and her siblings too. Like I have a very vivid memory of when I went to Peru for the first time. So my grandma's from northern Peru, from a town called Chiclayo, which is a small town in the north. And the first time I went to Peru, we went to Lima, Cusco, and Chiclayo to see family, and then obviously to like see the sights and see Machu Picchu and everything like that. But vivid memory of when we were in Chiclayo at my bisabuela's house, who, rest in peace, she has since passed on. But my I don't know, my great aunt, my grandmother's older sister, Tia Miki, grabbed a dish towel in the kitchen, and then my grandmother likewise, and they started dancing the marinera, which is a traditional Peruvian, I think it's northern Peruvian dance. And they use the dish towels because usually there's these very like flouncy skirts and dresses that are used in the dance. And they were using the dish towels and doing it around the living room, like around the living room while we were all sitting down. And that was like one of my first like visceral memories of like, oh my gosh, like this is part of who I am. Like I'm not just a spectator of this, like this is who I am too. And so, yeah, music and dance, really big part. And that's why it's shocking to me that it took me so long, and also having to have someone kind of push me down the path of listening to reggaeton on my own. It's just interesting to me. Like, I really feel like I would have come to this conclusion sooner, but I also had this kind of identity crisis with what it meant to be Latin and what it means to be Latin enough, in air quotes. So my first early memory of listening to Spanish music on my own, and one of my first big influences prior to me getting into reggaeton, which is what this video is about. Also, I'm going to try to say all the Spanish words as properly as possible, even though I feel like kind of a jackass when I purposely pronounce them, because I just sound like a white girl trying to speak Spanish. I actually do know a little bit of Spanish. Who knows if it will come out in the video? But yeah, who knows if it will come out in the video. But I'm going to make an earnest attempt to actually say the Spanish words correctly. So anyway, my first Spanish language and Latin music exposure was through Selena Quintanilla, which is, she's a very, 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 very famous Mexican-American Tejano singer, cumbia, like traditional Mexican folk music, tied into kind of the 80s, 90s space in which she was making music. So like very synth heavy, but then obviously tying in a lot of like traditional Latin and specifically Mexican instrumentation. And I actually sang her song, If I Could Fall in Love. If you guys watched or listened to the ranking my high school performances video, I sang If I Could Fall in Love with You. She was like the first Latin American woman who really like I felt a strong connection to. And I think it could be because at the time that was like at the height of my development as a singer and as a live performer and as a musician, and then kind of coming to grips with my Latin identity. Because to circle back, when I started listening to Selena, I was 17 or 18, I think. And basically, like I said, when I grew up in the US, being around a lot more, I guess, I don't know how to describe it other than traditionally or strongly Latin peers. So they were first gen, or their parents were first gen. Spanish was spoken in the house. Culture was very like overt. There was no, I don't know how to describe what I'm saying, but there was no dilution of culture, I guess, that some people suggested is what my experience of being a Latina is, because I have a white mother and my dad's not fully Peruvian. But that's also really fucked up view, in my opinion, which I'm sure I'll talk about a bunch of times in this episode. But basically in the US, I did not feel like I was allowed to be Latin or claim that I was Latin. I never said. And then the few times I tried to stick up for myself and be like, yeah, well, I am actually, I would get pushback. And I don't know if this will ever make its way back to him, but if it does, I was in like 8th or 9th grade. I specifically remember his name too. Marco Melendez in my English class asked me, oh, where are you from? Or like, oh, I think there was a conversation about like who was Hispanic or who was Latino. And I said, oh, well, my family is. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I'm a quarter Peruvian. He's like, oh, that doesn't count. You're not even half. he's like, and only half, like, and if you're half, it only counts if you speak Spanish. And I was like, well, I don't speak Spanish fluently and I'm only a quarter, but I'm still Latina. And he's like, no, you're not, but that was cute. And I was like, oh. So like an experience like that is kind of the energy I was met with in the US about trying to claim my Latin identity. It was like, I was not Latin enough. I did not speak the language, you know. I was only a quarter, so it doesn't count. Which is why I didn't view myself as a member of the community, because I was told by people who were that I wasn't. And something I've grown to really like be irritated by as an adult who is now like more firm in her own identity is the fact that like Latinos have this habit of like trying to be very exclusive about who counts as validly Latino or being Latin enough, which like in a changing world like today, it's not. And I'd understand it from a perspective of like, not everyone can claim that they're a part of a community that like is ostracized and alienated from other cultural groups, just like in the United States. I understand that it's a special, I don't know, group to be in, or a special relationship to have with your culture and other people. So not everyone, like, not someone who's 1/16 this or whatever is Latin. But I feel like if you grow up with it and you have lineage that is traceable back to Peru, I still have so much family that lives in Peru. So yeah, anyway, for that kid to say that to me, it has stuck with me until the end of time. And I'm sure it will stick with me until the end of time. But basically, when I moved to Thailand when I was 15, which had a quinceañera also, by the way. Was it the most traditional quinceañera ever? No, not really. But I had one, so take that. But when I was 15, I moved to Bangkok, and everyone started clocking that I was Hispanic. And one of the big experience I think that stuck out to me is my best friend Cedric, who is Argentine. When I met his parents for the first time, which this is a whack ass thing to say, but I'm just gonna put it out there. Like, Cedric, when we first met, we were new kids at the same time. Me and all of my best friends from high school were new kids at the same time. When Cedric first met me, he immediately clocked that I was Hispanic or Latina, and that was a weird phenomenon, and I thought it was one-off because I was like, oh, surely, like, not everyone thinks that, because no one in my life before, when I was living in the US, like, considered me to be Latina. Like, it was just not a part of my identity. I did not get to be a part of the club. And so when he said it, it threw me off. And then when I met Cedric's parents for the first time, Cedric's dad looked at Cedric and then looked at me and said, "Eres la mexicana?" I was like, what the fuck? Which, by the way, "Eres la mexicana" means, oh, are you the Mexican? So Cedric's father did actually go ahead and say that to me, which is funny because I don't actually look very Mexican. I guess there's a big range of what you can look like if you're Mexican, but I don't think I have any overt features, especially because I have like green eyes and freckles. So, but anyway, like that, and just like kind of the continued experience while I was living overseas of like people, I came to be described as more ethnically ambiguous, but people were picking up on the fact that like I was not just white for the first time in my life, and that I came from a mixed background, which was liberating in a way, but also really confusing because I was like, how do I navigate this? And that's where we bring Selena back into the equation. Wow, I've already been talking so much. I knew this was gonna happen. But yeah, I started listening to her music when I was at the peak of my like skill building and like height of my career with music in high school. And something that was so special about Selena which someone tried to dispute this with me when I literally did a research project like on her life when I was in high school. So fuck you to that individual because I'm right. But basically Selena was Mexican American. She could sing in Spanish and she could, navigate her way in Spanish, but she was not fluent in Spanish. And that was something that she was often criticized for, but also later it kind of got dismissed because she was so profound at storytelling through her singing in Spanish in her music. And that's one of the things I admired the most about her, is that she defined what it meant to be Latin and what is being Latin enough in her own terms for her own self and her cultural background. And I was like, oh, well, if she can do that, then surely I can too. So yeah, Selena was my first really big exposure to Latin music, and I think a really good taking off point, because also something I will also touch on is that the Latin music space can feel very male dominant a lot of the time, and so having a strong female Latin artist to look to as like my first example of using music to connect with my Latin identity and to define what being Latin enough is to myself, I think was really powerful. May she rest in peace forever and ever. She was taken from the world way too soon. But yeah, I just have so much love and admiration for her. And she opened a lot of doors for my identity and also me as a musician. And I just love her to bits. But anyway, to pivot to the meat of this episode, we're going to be talking about reggaeton, specifically Bad Bunny. Listo. Let me take you guys on a journey back to my first year of college and then the summer of 2022. First year of college, I had a Honduran Costa Rican roommate who's from Miami named Lauren. Lauren and I are still pretty good friends till today, but she was my first time ever having a very Latina friend. Because like I said, in the US, nobody really accepted me as being Latin. So one of my friends in high school, Amanda, was Puerto Rican, but it was not entirely something that we shared, I feel, in my opinion. That wasn't the core of our friendship. But one of my big bonding points with Lauren my first year of college was that both of us were from a Latin family and kind of had similar experiences of what it was like to be Latin. Because while she spoke way more Spanish than I did, she still was poquito no sabo, which is, I'm not going to explain what being a no sabo kid is, but basically it just means you can't speak Spanish and you're from a Latin or Spanish speaking country or Spanish speaking family. So she was actually my first exposure to Bad Bunny, other than Cardi B, and I like it. I knew of him from that, but then Lauren played a couple because we went to college during COVID, and the only way we could go out was throwing parties in our kitchen, which were usually just us and our roommates. But anyway, she played a couple Bad Bunny songs and I was like, oh, these are good. And then Gasolina, which I knew that song before, but yeah, she played a few Bad Bunny songs. I'm gonna try to scoot the mic a little bit closer because I'm trying to lean back. Yeah, she played a few Bad Bunny songs, and that was kind of my first exposure. So I added them to the Latin playlist I had made, which is now called Viva Peru Project, and it's a conglomerate of every form of Latin or Spanish speaking music I have ever listened to in one place. Also, something I just wanted to mention because I keep noticing it, my vocal crutch since starting this podcast has been y'all. By the way, not from the South, so don't really know where that came from, but hey, we're here now. Hopefully I can find a new one soon, because I don't really particularly love it. But anyway, what was I saying? yeah, Lauren was my first exposure to Bad Bunny and a little bit of reggaeton. But to fast forward to the summer of 2022. So y'all know that cliche ass saying of like, some of the people we meet in our life are for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Well, let me tell you, the story I'm about to tell definitely was only in my life for a reason, because we did not even make it to a season. But anyway, in 2022, I started an internship in Austria, and I met a young gentleman there, and him and I got along really well because we had a lot in common. He was also Peruvian American, but he was like full-blood Peruvian, like had been raised there for part of his life and everything like that. Push come to shove, we had a whirlwind summer fling, and then it kind of fell apart at the end. So, but that is not the point of the mention. The point is to talk about the reason why this person came into my life, and I think there's a plethora of reasons, but I will give the biggest credit to this. He guided me into being more confident and comfortable in my Latin identity, and exposed me to a lot of Latin culture that I had not previously had access to. Because, like I said, a lot of my friends that were Latino or Hispanic, like I'm friends with them, but it was like not really an overt part of their identities either. And then the couple of their friends I had in middle school or high school or like even elementary school, like it was not really a big thing. Individual who shall remain nameless. Not gonna say his name, but he basically, I started listening to Bad Bunny because I'm stubborn as fuck, and I had listened to Bad Bunny before. I knew of him. I knew that he was really famous. My brother also really liked Bad Bunny and tried to get me to start liking him, and I didn't listen, and I've apologized to him about this before. And he said, I get it. Sometimes it just takes a boy to get you to like something that somebody else was telling you to like all along. And I was like, hey, you have a little bit of a point. But also for visuals, sorry, my back is very sore, so I'm just trying to stretch my spine a little bit. But anyway, basically I started listening to Bad Bunny because I am stubborn as a mule, and this individual told me that he thought I would like it if I gave it a chance. And I said, hey, you're wrong, and that's not going to happen. And now I have a Bad Bunny tattoo on my hip. So, yeah, I guess I'm not always right, but I am most of the time. So I was like, okay, well, I'll listen to Bad Bunny and I'll see if I even like it, but I'm probably not going to. And then that was also the summer that Un Verano Sin Ti came out, which is still my favorite Bad Bunny album. I think partially nostalgia's sake and partially because it is just like the most incredible, phenomenal representation of Latin culture in a single album. There is not one skippable track on it, and you cannot convince me otherwise. I'm literally wearing my Bad Bunny tour merch because I went to the Most Wanted tour with my brother as his Christmas gift this past year. Or not this past year, this past April. So anyway, yeah, it started out by just me being stubborn and thinking that I knew best, and then I was proven wrong. Then I fell down this like really rapid rabbit hole, and like that was all I was listening to for like the next year. And I think what I love about reggaeton and Bad Bunny specifically, and specifically Un Verano Sin Ti, is he just poured every ounce of like what it meant to be Puerto Rican, what it means to be Latino, because at the end of the day, like Latin America, while each place in each region has things that are specific to their culture, it is really a huge melting pot. And I think that is kind of the beauty of Latin culture in general, which is like why it's so interesting that that reggaeton has taken off as much as it has, because feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure reggaeton originated in the Caribbean. I could be wrong. Let me look it up. Where did reggaeton originate? Panama. Okay, so I was right. And then later popularized in Puerto Rico. So, yeah. Okay, period. I was spot on. Caribbean. But why it's so interesting that like artists like Karol G and Fade are Colombian, and they're doing their own spin on reggaeton, and that's why I think Latin America is such a melting pot, and it's so cool. But anyway, that album gave me such an access to my Latin identity in a way that I could have never anticipated. Like understanding Latin slang, listening to different Latin American accents. I will be completely honest with you, there's still Bad Bunny songs that I have listened to over and over again, cannot rap them, and also sometimes can't understand what he's saying, and that's just part of the experience. But I also think something that Latin American music and reggaeton does really well is like storytelling. And yes, a lot of Latin American music is quite vulgar, I will admit that much. But to me, it's like not vulgar in the way that it would be in English. And I don't know how to describe that from a linguistic standpoint. Obviously, like I said, I don't speak Spanish fluently. I would say like I'm damn near fluent Spanish, like listening wise, I can understand it. That's why I'm no sabo, because I can understand, but I cannot speak it that well. Where was I going with this? Yeah, basically that was the summer that I fell in love with reggaeton music, and Bad Bunny was obviously my first. Hello? Bad Bunny was my first? Okay. That's not what I meant. But my brain just lagged a little bit. Bad Bunny was the first artist that got me into reggaeton music in general, and just kind of like modern day Latin music. And then after that, it was just like a tricklage of other artists, and then a tricklage of another artist that means so much to me, like to the point of tears, is Karol G, Carolina. I love her to goddamn death. And her album Mañana Será Bonito. That album meant so much to me. She's so talented, but also just again having a strong, successful female figure and voice in a very male Latin dominated space. And I wanted to clarify that I still love Bad Bunny. There was a phase, the Kendall Jenner phase of it all, that I was not his biggest fan, because I was feeling a little bit like he was a sellout after he had his accolades and success with Un Verano Sin Ti. But my opinion has changed because he just released Una Velita. I think that's the name of the song. Una Velita. Yeah. Which is literally dedicated to just like Puerto Rico's infrastructure, and is very like informative. And I think that is something that is so cool, and also something I think has contributed to my Latin identity, is artists who will use their music as a platform for political change. And Bad Bunny has done that multiple times in his being from Puerto Rico and being Puerto Rican, and I think it is incredible and really fucking cool that he does that. And you know, my faith in him wavered a little bit, but I think we're back on track. But that being said, Karol G, oh my god, I'm probably gonna film. That's what I was saying about debating whether or not I'm gonna do my Steven video next week or the week after. I really want to do it while things are still fresh, but also I'm never gonna forget that concert, because it was literally like fucking crazy. I was living like my YN fantasy. I'm not. And if you don't know what that means, good for you. Good for you if you don't know what that means. But for anyone who does know what that means, yeah, I was living my YN fantasy. But anyway, Karol G, the reason why she is so important to me is because she is such a strong female figure in a really, really male heavy space. But I'm also, yeah, like I was saying, Bad Bunny doesn't make me, I don't think he diminishes women at all. Like, yes, he talks about them in quite a vulgar way in his song, but like I said, I think to me it just feels different than like if somebody were to sing what he was saying in English. And also, like, it is quite evident that he has such a profound respect for women in one way or another. So just to say, like, I'm not saying that I'm getting toxic masculine energy from Bad Bunny. That's not the case. Benito would never do that. Me speaking like I know him. No. But yeah, I don't get that impression from him. But to pivot back to Carolina, my girl. Mañana Será Bonito is just such like an emotional outpour while still being like fun dance tracks. And then Mañana Será Bonito Bichota Season was also like just phenomenal. That was like more like dance, like I almost said pop your pussy, but I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, that was just like such a fun dance tracky kind of album too. But Mañana Será Bonito specifically, I think, is just such a perfect encapsulation of the female experience to be Latina and like bringing in elements of culture into her music, and then like being this dominant woman in a male dominant space with Spanish language music too, and being as successful as she was. Like, it is fucking crazy. Like, the stadium she was selling out and everything like that. I just absolutely enthralled with that young woman. But those two, Bad Bunny and Karol G, were my first really, really big exposures to Latin music. And I think I have a special relationship with Karol G in terms of my identity, like my Latin identity and being Latin enough, because she was the first artist I feel like I kind of found on my own when I first started liking, because obviously Bad Bunny, like, what would I call him? The individual from my past was the one who exposed me to Bad Bunny. So, like, in part, I give him credit for that. And, like, obviously, like, I was the one who chose to continue listening and the rest of his discography, obviously. But I think I have that special relationship with Carolina because, and by special relationship, I mean just kind of like from a listener's and consumer standpoint, because she was the first artist I found kind of on my own as well. So those two I love. And then I'll just like kind of pivot towards what I've more been listening to now, and then recapping on what all of these artists have done for my identity. My current favorites, which are like kind of switch up, are Young Miko, who is a Puerto Rican rapper as well, but she is a woman, and she has the coolest fucking aura of anyone. She's like still relatively young, which I didn't realize this until I became a fan of reggaeton, but a lot of them are like in their mid or early to mid 30s, which I was kind of surprised by. But she's still quite young. She's like 26, I think. She's killing the game. She's also lesbian, so she's a good advocate for LGBTQ plus like fans. Like, there's so many niches in reggaeton and like popular Latin music now that I think are so cool, because they're just a reflection of the modern world, and that's what I love about it. And music gives such an access in a way that, like, you know, feels so much less exclusionary than language and everything like that. And like, how many degrees separated are you from the motherland and everything like that, because there's definitely an air of that with Latinos. But Young Miko, I've been obsessed with her. Her music is so good. And it's not like, I think if I hadn't gotten into Bad Bo first, Young Miko would have been harder to digest, because she's very trap heavy. And that was my biggest qualm with listening to Bad Bunny in the first place. It's literally what I told that individual from my past. The reason why I didn't want to listen, I was like, oh, that's fucking trap music. I don't like trap. I don't want to listen to that. Because, you know me, I'm an indie girl. So especially at that time, like I was only listening to indie music. But all that to say, yeah, I love Young Miko. I think she's an excellent addition and example of strong women in a male dominant space, bringing their own sound and bringing nuance and niche to a really big genre. And then lastly, love him to bits, and he's also dating my girl Carolina, Fade, Fercho, whatever you want to call him. I'm probably going to refer to him as Fercho because that's easier for me to pronounce. But anyway, I started listening to him earlier this year. I also am certain that I've heard him before, but like actually intentionally started listening to him earlier this year. And oh my god, Luna, I could have that song injected into my veins with an IV. I'm not even kidding. How do you make a song that makes you both want to throw your ass back, but then also viciously cry from like your previous romantic experiences? It's absolutely clinical in an amazing way. Fade was just like kind of another one I tacked onto the list. I don't know why I didn't listen to him sooner, but he's incredibly talented. Also, like, I, out of curiosity, went all the way back to the beginning of his discography, and he's changed, like, his sound and, like, his branding and marketing so much over the course of his career. It's really interesting to see. And, like, I don't know, just these varying degrees of what it means to make reggaeton music, like, this melting mixture of all of Latin America into a mold, and like how people make it their own is really cool, especially like recently, and by recently I mean this past summer. Carolina released Si te antes tu wait a minute Si antes tú hubiera conocido, and that's a merengue song, which isn't an overt Colombian cultural element, but it's just cool, the melting pot. And that's what I just like how Latin America, like everywhere like every place borrows culture from another place, or there will be regional things that span across several countries. Like I know, especially in like the Andes Mountains, that span across all of the, what is it? West sorry, I had to do never eat shredded wheat real quick. The western side of Latin America. There's lots of shared culture there. And just kind of to bring all of these things back together, what it means to be Latin enough, and how reggaeton has helped shape my Latin identity. I feel like music, and reggaeton specifically, has given me access to my culture in a way that I don't know if I would have otherwise had access to. Something about like the power of singing a song in a room full of people who also know, who are screaming at the top of their lungs. Like it just made me, because I went to a reggaeton party. Wow, I said that white again. Reggaeton party. I just blew out the mic. With my cousin and some of her friends. And the fact that I knew like every other song that was coming on, and that I knew all the words, like it just felt so freeing. And the fact that like maybe I don't speak Spanish fluently, but this really big cultural thing, like I have access to now, and it helps me paint who I am as a Latina every single day. When I turn it on, when I sing it in the car, like, you know, seeing Karol G as like an example of like, you know, fashion and tying in culture that way too, and you know, expanding language through music too, because there's so much I've picked up just from listening to Spanish music over the past 2 years that I otherwise wouldn't know. And so I just think it's a really beautiful symphony of all the parts of culture coming into one. So dance and music and language and just like everything, because really like even in kind of the visuals of how these artists brand themselves it's like a spectacle. It's very fantastical, and yeah, it's just really interesting, and like I'm so tuned into it, and it makes me feel more comfortable and secure in my Latin identity having access to something like music. Like, it's very beautiful, and what was I gonna say? Very beautiful, and there's a word that I'm looking for that is evading me right now. Enlightening, that's the word I was looking for. It's a very beautiful and enlightening experience, and honestly, like, I'm so thankful to all the things in my life that have led up to me being able to have access to Latin music and to be a big fan of it. And it was kind of a wild card because I never expected I never expected that I would be as big of a fan of reggaeton specifically, but just like Latin music in general. I never anticipated that for myself. And the fact that it's like, it feels like it's such a big part of who I am now is really awesome. And I like don't really expect a ton of people to understand this, but when you are kind of in my shoes of like, am I Latin or am I not? Sometimes being Latin enough is just kind of defining it on your own terms, and I feel like a lot of modern day Latin music allows for that anyway. And then kind of just pivoting back to the video I did 2 weeks ago now, but on genre bending and Latin indie, like having reggaeton to be the stepping stone to then also get to the point of identifying these Latin indie bands. It's just like I continue to dive further in my relationship with myself and my Latin identity and music and how everything ties in. And also, it's just no surprise to me because music has always just been this huge sense of enlightenment. Like, even in high school, I did like extensive research on tango, on Andean folk music, and just like Latin American music in general, because it's just so interesting, like, to find out what there is in what similarities are, what differences they are, and just also getting to learn more about my own culture and background through a topic that intrigues me so much. So, yeah, I know that was just kind of a whole ramble of a lot of things, but basically to punctuate this video, I guess, obviously I'm going to be giving my songs. I'm going to go to the Viva Peru project to look at the list of songs I have right now. Oh, also obviously artists like Raul Alejandro too. But I'll give some recommendations of my favorite songs. Some of these songs also might not be reggaeton, but they're still worth checking out. But anyway, to punctuate what I was saying about my Latin identity, being Latin enough is being able to define your Latin identity on your own terms, and that was something I couldn't do for a really long time. But now that I'm grown and now that I have access to my own culture in a different way than I did when I was younger and have more security in who I am as well, it's a lot easier to be able to defend myself and stick up for myself and say, like, I'm Latin enough. Just because I don't speak Spanish fluently doesn't mean I'm not Latin. It's just, I think being able to define your identity on your own terms is really powerful, and there's no such thing as being Latin enough, you know. Being as Latin as you are is being Latin enough. So, with that being said, I'm going to pivot to my songs. So, for Bad Bunny, that's tough. I'm going to do Mohamigos by Tiny and Bad Bunny. I really like that song. Ojitos Lindos is my favorite Bad Bunny song of all time. I think I recommended that last week, possibly with Bomba Estéreo, because it's a collab. But that's my favorite Bad Bunny song of all time. Amargura by Karol G. Oh, I said I was going to do 3 Bad Bunnies. Oh well, those 2. There's so many more that I could list. but I won't for now. Fina by Bad Bunny and Young Miko, also really good. Offline by Young Miko and Fade. Luna, but I recommended that one before, so I'm not gonna recommend it again. And a song that is like so quintessential Peru is Que Viva Chiclayo. There's a version of it on Spotify by Juli that's a German name. Julie Freunt. Freunt. I don't know who this young lady is, but that's seeming a little bit off to me. Another really good Fade song, Bubalu. I really like that one. Deluvio. I don't know how to say that. By Rao, he released that this summer. That song's fucking fire too. Gatita Gangster. Culona. Oh my gosh, El Apagón in the Club. That one fucking went hard as shit. That was so good. Let's see. Let me think of one more. Desesperado. Yeah, Desesperados by Rao. That one's really good too. And Besties by Karol G. Also really good. Said that's so American. Yo Perreo Sola. La Santa. ¿Qué más? Caro. That one's good. Vete. That one's real good. Safayera. So I'm just listening off all of them now. I'll narrow it down and actually put my top 3 on the screen. Oh my gosh. Yo no soy celoso also. That one's really good too. But anyway, I'll narrow it down and put my actual top 3 on the screen now. But hopefully this episode wasn't too rambly. It is actually going to go ahead and be 50 minutes. So a little bit longer than I projected, but hey, that's not a problem. I'm probably gonna have to cut this down by a lot. But anyway, thank you guys for listening. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell so you're notified every time I post a video, which is usually every week, once a week, unless I indicate otherwise. What else? If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please be sure to follow the show and leave it a 5-star rating and a review if you so please. It would help me out greatly. And as for this week, I think that's a wrap. Next week will either be kind of a more video essay type video, similar to the genre bending video I did, or Steven recap. So, which that one's going to be a long one. I already know it. But that one's going to be more planned out and more me being technical, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, that is all for this week, guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will catch you in the next one. Smooches!